Hi guys, you're welcome back to the second video of the Go microservices using gRPC, Docker, and Postgres. So in our first video, I've already demonstrated how to create a simple Go server, and we've tested it and we ran that particular server on port 8080. Just to remind us of what we've been or what we plan doing, we plan creating three different repositories. In this case, I call them different microservices, or let's call them services. We have the broker service, and we have the authentication service, and we have the inventory service. We initially said that these different microservices or different repositories, depending on how you intend to look at it, are going to communicate with each other via gRPC, right? So I've already created that broker service is going to serve as the load balancer. So when a user make call, it goes to the broker service, which then determines which of the particular service is going to call via gRPC. So that have been done, and we have it already in our first video, and we have that repository on GitHub already. So this is the second video for our continuation of the Go microservice using this gRPC, Postgres, and Docker Compose. So what I'm going to do in this video is to go ahead and create the remaining two repositories, the authentication service repository and the inventory service repository. And I will run these two different services on different ports. Make sure that when we make calls via the postman, we are able to reach these services and return a reasonable response. When we have that done, then we can move on to the next stage. So this is our previous service, the broker service. That's what I see on my screen. So I'm going to go to the terminal and create two extra repositories. I will be very fast in this case because I'm just trying to repeat what we've done before in terms of the broker service. So I'm going to do the same thing for the authentication service and do the same thing for the inventory service. By the time we do these two same things, we would have known how to start a simple server using broker service because they are all repetition, and when you want to get to know something, when you repeat it several times, it sticks, right? So I have my root directory called tutorial. You can call yours anything, and we've already created the first service, which is the broker service. So I'm going to create another folder. Let me call it it's a make directory. Let me call it tutorial, but in this case I'm going to make it let me call it authentication service, or authentication, right, service. Let me create it. Let me call it this, right? So I have this is the second repository I created. Let me create another repository and then call it inventory service, right? Let me say inventory service. You can see I'm doing this thing at the same time because it's the same thing that we are going to repeat, right? So we have our three repositories here already. We have the broker service, which was the first thing we did in our first video. I have created these two repositories: tutorial authentication service and tutorial inventory service. So I'm going to create some folders inside these two repositories, or inside these two folders, as the case may be. So, but first, what do I need to do? I need to initialize these particular folders or repository to use Go modules, just the way you do your npm init, and then you initialize it for your node modules, right? So I'm going to check into this inventory service and this authentication service and do same for my Go application. But in this case, not npm module, I'm going to do Go mode init, right? So let's start that with our broker, our authentication service, right? So let's cd tutorial authentication service, right? So let's say go mode init. What do I call it? github.com/code with oj slash let me call it right. So this is what I decided to call it. Let me reduce this. Okay, you can see go mode init github.com code with oj. So look, this particular name, like I said initially in the first video, is totally anything. You can call it anything, but this is always a convention that I do follow, and it's good that you follow that convention, because sometimes you can have a package on GitHub, and then you can kind of specify the package name, and then it will directly pointed to your GitHub repository, and that has been the convention so far, right? So I've initialized a Go project in my authentication service. So let me do same for my inventory service. I will go into the inventory service, right? And I'll say go mode init github.com/code with OJ. That's my repository slash let me also give it this, right? Tutorial inventory service. Good. So I've initialized these two repositories. Clear the screen. So these two repositories that I have, inventory service and authentication service, have been initialized to use Go modules, right? So I can now start installing Go modules or Go packages in this repository, because this is now a Go repository. Okay, so let's now continue. Let me cd into tutorial authentication service and create two subfolders, right? So make directory, let me call this cmd, and let me make another directory, but in this time inside the cmd I'm going to create another folder called API. Okay, so if I cd cmd, I will see another folder called API, cd API, right? So you can see my present working, I'm still in my authentication service, but I've created two folders. First cmd, within the cmd I created another folder called API. So I'm going to create three files inside this folder API. So let's create those files: touch, main.go, browse.go, and handler.go. Okay, so we have these three files in our broker service. So I'm doing the same thing that I did for our broker service for this inventory service and authentication service. So what I did now, I'm going to repeat it for our inventory service, right? So ls. So I have these three folders created. So that's it for our authentication service. So let me go back to my inventory service. Clear screen. So let me see what we have here. So this is the inventory service, right? This inventory service. So let me cd into it and create those folders and sub files. Cd into our, and then make directory. Let me call it cmd. Cd into cmd and make directory. Let me call it API. Okay. Right, let me cd into API and then create two files: main.go, browse.go, and handler.go. Okay, so you can see for ls, I've created three different files: cd dot dot. Okay, right, ls. So I've created the different files I needed for my folders for my project. So let me just open it in Visual Studio Code. Right, so in my Visual Studio Code, you can see I have three folders in my working directory. I have the broker service, which we've already implemented and we are okay with it, and then I have my authentication service. You can see the subfolder I created: API, handler, main, and routes. And then I have what folder again? Inventory service, which I have subfolder cmd API. I have handler, main, and routes.go. Right, so that's good. So what I'm going to do now is to start implementing our simple server. Start a simple server. Let me start with the authentication server. So let me go to the main.go file. Let me close all these folders, all these files. So currently I am trying to work on the authentication service, start a simple server, just the same thing we did for the broker service. That's what I want to repeat for the authentication service. After repeating that for authentication service, I'm going to repeat same for the inventory service. And then we do the same thing like 3 times now, and we know how to start 3 different servers running on different ports, right? So let me go to my main.go file of the authentication service. So what are we going to do? I'm going to first, let me tell you the step we're going to take. One, I'm going to work on the RAS file, right? Then I'm going to work on the handler file. Do you understand? And then lastly, I'm going to now work on the main.go file, right? Handler.go file, routes.go file, right? So let's do that. But every file will have to start with package main, right? And then let's do the same for handler package main. So I'm working on what the authentication service, and then routes too, we have a package main. So they all belong to the same package main, right? So if you are conversant with Go, or if you know Go, you know that you can organize your codes in packages, right? I can have package main, I can have package users, I can have package rating in the same repository, right? So you organize all your code that are related in packages, right? But this time around, I'm using main to organize all the files, all my code in this particular repository, authentication repository. Sorry. So I need a specific package. I want to install specific package for all of them, right? For the authentication service and the inventory service. And this package is the routing package. Let's go to the repository. So this is the repository that we want to use. So we are using Chi router. Chi is a lightweight, idiomatic, composable router for Go HTTP service. So how do we install it? So for you to install a Go package, you say go get and the package name, right? So let me go to my terminal. Let me cd into authentication service and install the Chi router, right? What else do I need to install? I want to also install middleware because we might need it in the future. So go get, right? So that's it. So I want to also install cross-origin resource sharing, so that I can be able to make calls from different server that is not hosted within my API. Let's say maybe the front end, right? That is maybe hosting a different server. Okay, so let me do that. So right, so I've installed these 3 packages for the authentication service. Let me do same for the inventory service, right? cd tutorial inventory service. I'm going to install all the packages I installed for authentication service for inventory service too. So let me go back. Okay, let me start by installing the calls. I will still go back and install the Chi router. So this is the routing package that will manage our routing for us. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, let's go back to the Chi router and let's install it. Okay, right, and then I want to install the middleware too. Let me just copy it. You can install it once you know the package name. You can just do go get and then you install it. Okay, right. So that's inventory service. We've installed all these packages for the inventory service and the authentication service. Let me go back to our code, and then let's now implement our routes file. So let's say func routes, right? So but before then, let me go to my main.go and then create a type config of type struct, right? If you remember, I did the same thing for the broker service. I'm doing the same thing for auth service. So because I want to associate my routes to that particular type as a receiver, right? Good. So now I'm implementing the routes, right? And the route will basically return the HTTP dot handler function for me, right? Interface, so that I can use it in my main route. Okay. So for you to implement routing, this is what you need to do. First of all, instantiate an object of the chi router that we installed, chi.new router, right? So it auto import the package for us. So how do we now implement the route? Maybe the course. So let's implement the course. Let's go back to course and then implement course. Of course, you know what course is. So this is how to implement course. So I've explained this in our first video for the broker service. So I'm going to just do same thing here. So what this does is that I'm telling my API to reduce this. So that's it. All right. Okay, so what this is saying is I want to allow every call that has HTTPS and every other call too that have HTTP, and I also want to allow get, post, put, delete options. I want to also accept a call that has authorization and the content type, right? I have to allow credential first and mass age, maximum value, right? So I've implemented calls now. You can have different options in this and you can tweak it as you want. Okay. So I can now create my routes. So since this is authentication service, let me still call it. So we are going to still tweak this thing, but first of all, I want to just start a simple HTTP server and then make a call and be sure that our service is working well before we now tweak it to now start using gRPC. So note that in all this, it is only the routes, the broker service that is going to actually be interfacing the internet, where the front end is going to make call to the broker service, and then the broker service can now interact with the inventory service and the authentication service via gRPC. Okay, so but I'm going to just start HTTP server on all these particular service so that you just know how to run a simple HTTP server, right? And then from there you can then transition to making use of gRPC communication between the different different services within your application. Okay, so let's continue. So how do we create so we can say R. So let's say post. We want to create a post method to create our service. So let me call this I can still call it authentication auth service, right? And then let me say create user, right? And then what will be the handler? App dot create user. Okay, and this we can now return so we don't have this create user yet. So we are done implementing our routes in our authentication service, right? So let's go and implement the handler. Okay, func of receiver of config, and what do we call it? Create user, if you remember, right? That's this create user here. Okay, so once we have this here, what do we do? It will accept of response writer, right? And request of HTTP of pointer to HTTP of type request. Okay, so this is how to implement our handler, right? So every request that comes to our route is then routed to this function to be implemented, just like the way you create your simple node server. There you have your routes and your handler. Okay, so you can see it. This is the route, this is the handler, and it comes here and we return a response. Okay, so let's continue. So the next thing I want to do now is to, for instance, we're going to return a response to our front end at the calling services, right? So basically, let me do the same thing like I did in let me say type user struct. Okay, we are going to do the same thing like we did in our broker. So what do we do? Let me create a name. Let me say type string. Okay, and you're going to return JSON name, right? And then email type string JSON email, right? So this is what I want to return to my front end, right? So let's say data, right? Let's say it is a reference to the user that we have here. Name, you can give your name as John Doe. Okay, email john@email.com, right? So I'm implementing the handler now. Don't forget, we just finished implementing the routes, so I'm implementing this handler in the routes. That's what I'm doing now. So, and in this implementation, I just want to return a simple response that has a username and email, right? So let's do this. So we are, for us to be able to return this, we need to marshal it into JSON, right? And then for us to do that, we'll have two types of variable that we return when marshalling. Okay, so we have json.marshal, right? And it's going to accept our data, and then it's either going to marshal it successfully or it returns an error. So if there is an error while marshalling, let's just log it and see what is there. Just print lane. Okay, this is not equal to new, and if there is no error, then we have our marshaled bytes, right? So let's have some response header. Let's say set, let's say our content type, content dash type, let's call it application slash JSON, right? So what else do we want to have? Let's have our HTTP status, right? Header, let's say http dot status. Okay, right? And then we can then actually make that call to return this response. So it will be write response dot write, and then we'll pass what we are sending to the front end, right? And it could throw an error. So if error not equal to new, let's just log it to print lane error, right? So I've implemented the routes for authentication service. I've also implemented the handler for authentication service, but this is not yet working. This handler is just returning a simple response with a username and the email, and this is how to marshal the user name into bytes and then create a response header and the status code for the response header, and then we now actually make or send this particular marshal data back to the front end, and then while doing that, if there's an error, we log the error out. Okay, so this is fine from our routes to our handler. So the next thing I'm going to do is to implement the main, that's the server itself. So this is when I'm trying to implement the server. So I've done these two things. The first one, check, done. Second one, check, done. So this is what I want to do now. The server, I want to implement the server itself now. Okay, so and you remember I said that every Go application has a main function, which is the entry point of all the main application, right? Which is the entry point of all Go application. Just like you have in some JavaScript application, Node.js, you have the index function, right? Or the index file, for instance. That is the entry point of the application. So func main, which is the entry point of the Go application or Go server, as the case may be. So what do I do next? I want to make use of the routes handler. Don't forget that I want to make use of the route handler, because that's once the request comes to the main function, it looks for the handler or the routes, it locates the route, and then the route takes it to the handler, and then it implements the handler and return back to the user. Okay, that's what's typically happen. Request comes to the main function locates the route then route my request to the handler gets implemented, and then return a response to the front end. So this is the main function that received that request, locate the route locates the handler, implements the handler, and return the response. Okay, so and for me to access that my particular route, don't forget the route is a receiver of the config struct, right? Like I said this struct is more like an object, right? A class where you associate functions and types to it, right? But in this Go construct, it's not called a class, right? It's called a struct. Okay, so let's continue. So let's say app. I cannot associate my main function to a receiver. If not, I would have said, okay, let me say app, and I say app, a receiver of config, but it does not make sense, okay? Because we already have config here. But in that, our routes and handler, I did same thing for them, okay? If you see it, you can see. You go to our handler, you can see, right? So that now gives me ability to access it via the config struct, right? So you can see now app friends of config. So from here now I can access my routes file. You can see it returns what? Routes and creates user. So this particular reference to this config struct returns this create user and routes, because we've already associated those routes and create user, the routes handler and the create user handler, to this struct, so we can then access it from the main function. Okay, so let's continue. What do we do now? Let's define our server from the net/http package. So this HTTP server, so I can call it srv. I did the same thing broker, so if you're following this should have been very familiar to you. So it is to be a reference to http.server. So what does it do? It accepts address, and then it accepts it accepts handler, right? So let me call this, let me say define a constant here, cost web ports. You know, I did same thing in my broker, so this should be 8081, and let me use string formatting to printf, and then this is %s because it's a string. It's my percentage. I'm trying to locate my percentage. Okay, let's continue. I can't find my percentage. Right. Okay. The handler will be what? App.routes. Okay. And then you can imagine I'm looking for percentage. Right, so I have it now. So I can then start and listing to listen on a specific port, right? All right, so how do we do that? We can then say when we want to listen, it could return an error. So we can now say srv listing and serve, right? So if error not equal to new, let's just log it, log.println, and then the error, right? So I've implemented my main function for the authentication service running on port 8080. So let's run this particular authentication service and see if it runs on this particular port 8080. We are going to send a post request to this route, authentication service create user, and then it should return this response to us if everything works well. All right, so let me seed into authentication service and start it. Right, how did I run our broker service? I did go run man. Oh, I have to go to our cmd folder API. That's where I'll find my files. So I say go run. So we are going to refactor how we run this application. This is not the standard way of running this application, but we are trying to start off this server. Main routes and then handler. Okay. So there is a problem. It has not properly installed our packages. So how do we fix this issue? Let me go to the root directory, cd. Right, so I can now say go mode tidy for it to actually install the packages. So it has not installed. So let's go back and run the application. Go run main.go routes.go handler.go. Okay, so what is the error here? So r.use undefined type func has no field or method use. r.post undefined function has no field or method post. So let's go to our routes file and see the error we are having. Right, so we didn't import a specific we didn't import the specific version we installed. Don't forget, if you go back to our installation, we installed a specific version. The version we installed was version v5, right? While here you are seeing is just gochi, so we need to say /v5 because that's what we installed, right? So if I go back to my, so you can see this squarely red line means that it has still not yet imported the module for us. So I'm going to go back to my root directory of the authentication service and still say go mode tidy for it to install, to download the package, right? So if I go back to my application, you can see I don't have that squarely red line again. Okay, so but we are still having error. R.use no field use. So I don't have any field use. So why is that? Why are we having this error? We shouldn't have this error. What did we do wrong? Okay, we have to implement this method and we didn't implement it, so it's not seeing it. Good. So you see the error has left us. All right, so let's go back and re-execute our run now. So it's good to see this error along the way so that you understand that it's not a bot that is talking with you. You encounter issues and errors while trying to write code or develop application, and then you know how to debug and solve those issues. So let's run our application again. Go run main.go. So but before then, let me see where I am. Present working directory. So I have to seed into cmd API because that's where our files are. That's where I'm located. You will locate handler.go, main.go, and routes.go. So I say go run main.go, routes.go, and handler.go. Right. So it is running now, but nothing is printed on the console for us. So let me go and add some statement in our console so that we can see that it's running. Let me say log.println starting authentication service. Okay, and then let me say oh no, let me do it in our main.go, not here. And then before this, let me say log.println starting authentication service on ports, web ports. Right, good. So let me stop it and then run it again. Go run main.go, routes.go, and handler.go. So it's running. So our authentication service is running on port 8081. So let's go and test it out and be sure that we are hitting our endpoint. What was the endpoint we defined in our route? Authentication create user, right? So let me go back to my Postman. I have a folder broker. Let me create another folder. That one will be for authentication, right? Right, inside it, let me create a request. Let me call it create user, and then we are saying localhost, but in this case it will be localhost 8081, right? And then we call it auth service. What was it? Auth service, right? Let me even rename it authentication service. So authentication service create user. That's a post method that accepts a body JSON, right? Let me just say accept name. Let me call it Obina, and then let's say email. Let me say oj@email.com. Email.com, right? So I have to stop this server again and start it again because of the change I made in our routes part. I changed it to authentication instead of auth, right? So let's make this call. So this should return what should it return to us? It should return this particular data for us: name John Doe, email john@email.com. So let's see if that works. Correct. So that works perfectly fine. That works perfectly okay. So we are done with our authentication service. We are done with our authentication service. So I'm going to go ahead and do exactly the same thing for our inventory service. I'll urge you to do that, okay? Stop this video, go and do that yourself. Start a simple server for inventory service and then come back and see if you get it right, okay? So go on and do that. Let me now do the same thing for our inventory service. So I'm going to stop the authentication service and then go into our inventory service, right? Clear? ls. So in my root directory, I have the broker service, which I've already done. I have authentication service, which I've already done. So this is what I want to do now, right? So let me see this tutorial inventory service. That's what I want to now work on, right? So inventory service, we have our cmd API handler main.go. This file format is the same thing for the broker inventory and now for broker authentication and now the inventory. This file format did not change. It's the same for all of them. All right. So let me increase how this looks. Appearance, zoom in. Okay. View, appearance, zoom in. Right. So what do we do? If you remember, I say you have a package, you add all this implementation in a package. We organize your Go application in a package. So I'm going to add them in package main, right? Main function, main.go file will also be package main, right? Route will also be package main, and save, right? So based on our implementation, what do we start with? We start with implementing the routes. So okay, no, we also went to our main file and created a struct type config of type struct, right? We started a config type of struct. Okay, so we have this, and then we come to our route and say func, which is a receiver of config, right? So this should be sticking now, routes, and it return the type of http dot what handler, right? Good. So what do? We initialize our chi object. We state a new chi object, right? Chi dot new router. Okay, that sticks, right? Good. So what we do next? We implement our calls, right? And if you remember, I'm lazy. I just went and copied that implementation because I don't want to retype everything. So let's go to our course implementation and then just copy it and make use of it because I am lazy, right? So sometimes this happens. Good. So how do we create route? Say r dot, I'm using post now. I'm using post, all of them now. So this is inventory. Let me call it inventory service. Inventory service create inventory, right? And it's going to write us to create inventory in our handler. Okay, we don't have it implemented here, so we're going to implement it, and it's going to return r, right? It's going to return. So this is it. This is the implementation of our what routes file. We create our routes handler, which is a receiver of type config, and it return HTTP handler, which will be implemented in our main function, right? So we start by creating a new instance of our chi router, and then we implemented course. Then we created a route that will now direct us to our create inventory function, which we now implement and return a response to the user, and then it returns the route objects, right? So let's go to our handler. So I say func, let's make it a receiver of type config, right? And what do we call it? Create inventory, right? And what does it receive? A response writer, http dot response writer, and a request, which is a pointer of http dot request, right? So we are good to go. So what do I do normally? I always if you remember what we do, we create a type and then we basically return it. So let me say type inventory. Okay, let me inventory this time around, not user, right? So let me call, what's the name of the inventory? Is of type string, name, right? And then let me give it a description. Description is of type string. Description, right? Okay, so what else I want to add here? Maybe let me add an ID. Let me say it's of type int 32, right? Let's say JSON ID, right? So to even make this exciting a bit, I might decide to return an array of inventories, right? So let me say type all inventory structs that have one variable of type JSON of data, right? So I can then say, let's say array, let's say all inventory will now be, right? You can say ID 1, name, shoes, description, let's say size, let's say okay, size 10. Let's duplicate this and then repeat. I want to return an array, so you can see how this works. Trousers, let me call it size 20. Let me say shirts, let me say this is medium, right? So you see I'm trying to make this a little bit exciting. So we can then say data should be equals to all inventory. Let me say reference to all inventory, this, then data all inventory, right? So we now start with our marshalling out. So our marshalling out will now be it's either we have error while marshalling out or we have an output, right? So we have an out error json.marshal, right? Pass our data in, and it's either we have error or we don't have. Okay, So if we have error, we say log.println, we print the error. If not, what do? We proceed to say header.set and then what are we setting? The content type, what do we call it? Application JSON, and then we give it a status dot write header right, and say http dot status. Okay, right. Then we now proceed to do the actual write out. Error. Then we now say w.write. We now pass out it, right? So if we have error while sending this response to the user, it should log it out for us. That's what I'm doing. Println error. Okay, so that is that for this. So we are done implementing our handler. So let's go to our main function. Okay, so implementing routes, check. This have a squiggly yellow underline because we've not made use of these routes anyway, but we have to make use of it in the handler, right? Because if you remember, the request goes to the main function, locates the handler takes us the appropriate route, and then direct us the handler, which then gets implemented and return a response to the user. So let's go and implement the main function now, right? The main function has the server implemented, and then it has the server implemented, and then we're going to specify a different port here. You know, on the broker we say 8080, on the authentication server we say 8081. Now let's say 8082, right? So let's say func main. So if you remember, what do I do next? App reference to type config, so that we can have access to the routes and handlers, right? So what do I do? Define my server, right? So how do I define server? SRV. So this should have been very familiar with you now, right? You should have been very familiar with this. Now this should be server that accepts two things. It accepts an address, which we do just print f, right? And then we are passing percentage of type string, and then we say web ports. So I have to define web ports constant. So let me say constant const web ports. Let's say it's 8082, right? And then handler will be app.routes, right? So I can access my handler now. So let me now listen to the server. It's a blocking method anyway. So it can give us an error. So this should be server srv.listen and serve, and if there's error, it should log it, right? Log.println error, right? Okay, right. So let me log an output just like we did the other time. Log.println, so that we know this running. Starting inventory service on port web port, right? So this is so that we can see on the console that actually the server is running, right? And have an idea if it fails or if it didn't fail. So we finished implementing our simple server for the inventory service. We have our routes implemented, we have our handler implemented, we have our main function, which is the entry point of this application, that have a server defined. The server port is passed, and then the route is passed, so that this route directs us to the handler that gets implemented and returned, and then we're listing on that particular port that we've defined on this server, right? So what do we do? Let's get to the terminal again and then get to test if it's running. So this is the time of truth. So let's get to this. So ls, so we are still in our inventory service. So let's cd to cmd api clear, and let's run. So what do we do? Go run main.go routes.go handler.go. Wow, this run. So this is on port 8082. So let's go to our Postman and try to test if we're going to get. So I'm going to create its own different folder. Let me call it inventory. So you can see our API is taking shape, right? Oh, no, I mean folder. Let me delete this. Inventory. So you can see our API is taking shape. Our broker service, all the endpoint that belongs to the broker that will hit the broker will be organized there. All the endpoint that is needed on the inventory service will be organized in this folder, and all the endpoints needed for the inventory service will be organized in this folder. But if you come to think of it, this authentication and inventory service folder is not needed actually, because we're going to use gRPC to communicate inside between the services. The broker service talks to the authentication service if it needs any handler there, or if it needs any implementation there. The broker service talks to the inventory service if it needs any implementation there, based on the user request and return a response. So why I'm even doing this is just for the testing purpose. Once we've done and we create our proto file and start implementing the gRPC, we don't need these two files, these two folders. We only need the broker service, which will have all the endpoints that just hits the broker. Then it talks to the different services based on the services we've defined on our proto file and our proto buffers, and then it returns the response to us. So, but for our testing purpose, just to make sure we have these different HTTP servers working, let's just have these two folders for the authentication and inventory service. So let me create a request. Let me call it create inventory, right? It's going to be a post method. So this is going to be localhost, but in this case 8082, right? And then let's go and check what we call the endpoint routes. We say it's inventory, create inventory, okay, and it's post. So let me inventory, create inventory, post. And we're supposed to send this body, but I'm not sending anything because I am not even extracting anything on the back end. So let me just make the call. Right, so you can see our array of inventory has been returned to us, right? So this is working well. You can see that. So we have simple servers, and let me go to the root directory, and let me stop cd dot dots. Right, so I have my inventory service, I have my broker service, and I have my authentication service. So you can see them here. So you can see my authentication service, right, my broker service, and my inventory service. So they are all different repositories. They all have their own GitHub repository. They are different code base actually, but they are going to communicate with each other based on my design that you are seeing here. Okay, so have that in mind. So we've created these three simple servers. for our broker inventory and authentication. The next thing I'm going to do is to create a Docker Compose file to manage this particular services. So we're going to create a Docker image for authentication, broker, and inventory, and use compose file to manage and run them, right? So that will be the next thing that will happen. In that particular next video, you will see how we are going to run these services differently without having to do go run, main.go, handler.go, and routes.go. We are going to run it differently and manage it properly using Docker Compose file via creating Docker images for these different services. So if you love this video and you are expecting the next video, please like and share, right? So the more I receive like, the more I get encouraged to create this video to educate you guys, right? So please like, share, and click on the notification button so that you get notified when I upload this video. I'm going to be doing it more often, right? But that is depending on you guys. Let me know if this is adding value to you. That's how I get encouraged and create more of this content. So this is a series that we will finish. We will finish it no matter how stressful it is, right? So see you in the next video. Thank you guys.